Imagine a quiet, unassuming schoolteacher, a father of two, blending seamlessly into the gray, oppressive world of the Soviet Union in the 1970s. Now picture that same man, Andrei Chikatilo, hiding a darkness so vile it would shatter an entire nation's sense of safety. How could a man who graded papers by day become the Rostov Butcher, a serial killer responsible for at least 52 murders of women and children? If this chilling paradox hooks you, hit that subscribe button like this video and share it to uncover the twisted tale of one of history's most shocking figures. Leave a comment. What would you do if you discovered your neighbor was a monster, like Chikatilo Andrei Romanovich? Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in Yablukne, a small Ukrainian village ravaged by famine and war. On the surface, he was unremarkable, a lanky, bespectacled man with a soft voice and a timid demeanor. Yet beneath this facade lurked a predator whose crimes would horrify the Soviet Union and beyond. What made Chikatilo so shocking wasn't just the scale of his atrocities, but the stark contrast between his public persona and his private horrors. To his neighbors, he was a disciplined communist, a devoted husband, and a teacher who seemed harmless, even awkward. But his unassuming appearance masked a psychological storm, a blend of shame, rage, and compulsion that drove him to commit unspeakable acts. Chikatilo's early life offers clues to his descent. The 1930s Soviet famine, known as the Holodomor, left millions dead and young. Andrei witnessed horrors that scarred him deeply. His mother told him stories of neighbors resorting to cannibalism, and one chilling tale claimed his older brother was eaten by desperate villagers. Whether true or not, these stories planted seeds of fear and fascination in his mind. At school, he was a target of relentless bullying due to his frail frame and chronic bedwetting, a condition that persisted into adulthood and fueled his deep-seated shame. By the time he was a teenager, Chikatilo was painfully shy, socially inept, and plagued by sexual dysfunction, unable to perform without violent fantasies. These early traumas didn't justify his crimes, but shaped a psyche primed for deviance. In 1963, Chikatilo married Feodosia Odnacheva, a pragmatic woman who accepted his limitations. They had 2 children, and to the outside world, he was a model citizen. He earned a degree in Russian literature, worked as a teacher, and later took clerical jobs, moving to Rostov-on-Don in 1978. But his inner world was unraveling. By the late 1970s, his fantasies turned to reality, targeting vulnerable women and children in secluded areas. His first confirmed murder in 1978, a 9-year-old girl, marked the start of a 12-year reign of terror. What's shocking is how Chikatilo exploited Soviet society's blind spots. The USSR's rigid ideology dismissed serial killing as a Western problem, leaving police unprepared for a predator like him. His unthreatening appearance, described by colleagues as a gray mouse, allowed him to move undetected. He'd lure victims with promises of food or money, exploiting their trust. His crimes were not just brutal, but ritualistic, often involving mutilation and acts too horrific to detail here. These weren't random outbursts. They were calculated, driven by a need to dominate and destroy. Modern psychology offers insight into Chikatilo's mind. Experts suggest he had a mix of paraphilias, including sadism and necrophilia, rooted in his inability to reconcile his desires with his public image. Unlike charismatic killers like Ted Bundy, Chikatilo was socially awkward, making his ability to evade capture even more baffling. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a product of a system that ignored his existence. In 1984, he was arrested but released due to a blood type mismatch, a chilling example of investigative failures. As we peel back the layers of Chikatilo's life, the question looms: how did a man so ordinary become a monster, so extraordinary? Stick around to uncover the chilling details of his first murders and the societal failures that let him thrive. But first, let's hear from you. Hit that like button and comment. What shocks you most about Chikatilo's double life, the first blood, and a system's blindness? What kind of man lures a child to a secluded shack promising candy, only to unleash a nightmare that would haunt a nation? Andrei Chikatilo's first murder in 1978 wasn't just a crime, it was the spark that ignited a 12-year inferno of terror across the Soviet Union. If this chilling glimpse into the Rostov Butcher's descent grips you, smash that like button, subscribe to Weird History Unveiled, and share this video to spread the word about one of history's darkest figures. Drop a comment. Could you spot a predator like Chikatilo hiding in plain sight? By 1978, Andrei Chikatilo was 42, a man teetering on the edge of his carefully constructed facade. Living in Shakhty, a gritty mining town near Rostov-on-Don, he was a schoolteacher, respected, yet unremarkable. His marriage to Feodosia provided stability, but beneath his quiet exterior, a storm was brewing. Years of humiliation, childhood bullying, sexual dysfunction, and professional failures had festered into a compulsion he could no longer suppress. On December 22, 1978, Chikatilo crossed a line from which there was no return, committing his first confirmed murder and setting the stage for the Rostov Butcher's reign. The victim was Yelena Zakotnova, a 9-year-old girl with bright eyes and a trusting smile. Chikatilo spotted her at a bus stop, shivering in the winter cold. He approached, offering warmth and sweets, his soft voice disarming her suspicions. He led her to a dilapidated shack he'd secretly purchased, a place where his darkest fantasies could unfold. What happened next was horrific. Yelena was subjected to a brutal assault, stabbed repeatedly, and left lifeless in the icy Don River. The details, too gruesome for this telling, revealed a ritualistic savagery that would become Chikatilo's signature. He later confessed that the act gave him a twisted sense of power, a fleeting escape from his lifelong feelings of inadequacy. What's shocking isn't just the crime, but how close Chikatilo came to being caught, and how he slipped away. Yelena's body was found 2 days later, sparking a police investigation. Suspicion fell on Chikatilo almost immediately. A neighbor reported seeing him with the girl, and bloodstains were found near his shack. Police brought him in for questioning, but here's where the Soviet system's failures took center stage. Chikatilo's wife provided an alibi, claiming he was home that evening. More critically, a forensic blunder involving blood-type evidence, Chikatilo's, didn't match the semen found at the scene, cleared him. Modern science later revealed this was due to a rare biological quirk called non-secretor status, meaning his blood type didn't appear in bodily fluids. This error, combined with the Soviet police's inexperience with serial killers, let a monster walk free. The Soviet Union's denial of serial crime was Chikatilo's greatest ally. In the 1970s and 1980s, the communist regime insisted such deviancy was a capitalist disease, not a Soviet one. This propaganda blinded authorities to the growing body count. Chikatilo, emboldened by his escape, began refining his methods. He targeted runaways, prostitutes, and children, those least likely to be missed in a society strained by economic hardship and bureaucratic apathy. His unassuming demeanor, often described as grandfatherly, made him invisible. He'd approach victims at train stations or bus stops, offering rides, money, or alcohol, exploiting their desperation in a crumbling system. Between 1978 and 1982, Chikatilo killed sporadically, learning to cover his tracks. He avoided leaving fingerprints, disposed of bodies in remote forests, and relied on the Soviet police's disorganization. By 1982, his murders grew bolder, with 5 confirmed victims that year alone. Each crime was a grotesque escalation, marked by mutilation and acts that horrified even seasoned investigators. Yet the authorities remained clueless, often misclassifying the deaths as accidents or unrelated crimes. In one case, a victim's body was found near a railway, but police attributed it to a random assault, not a pattern. This systemic blindness allowed Chikatilo to operate unchecked, his confidence growing with each kill. Psychologically, Chikatilo was unraveling. His murders weren't just about violence. They were a warped attempt to reclaim control. Modern criminologists suggest he suffered from a lethal mix of sadism and sexual dysfunction, where killing became a substitute for intimacy he couldn't achieve. His victims, often young and vulnerable, represented the power he felt denied in life. Yet he returned home each night to his wife and children, grading papers and attending party meetings, as if nothing had happened. This duality, monster by day, family man by night, makes Chikatilo's story so unsettling. The emotional toll on his victims' families was immense. Yelena's mother, for instance, was consumed by grief, unaware that the man responsible lived just miles away. The Soviet system offered little support, dismissing families' pleas for justice as overreactions. This neglect fueled Chikatilo's spree as he preyed on a society too broken to notice. By 1983, whispers of a killer in Rostov began to spread, but no one connected the dots to the quiet man in glasses. As Chikatilo's body count rose, so did his recklessness. How long could he exploit a system too proud to admit its flaws? In the next part, we'll dive into the height of his killing spree and the chilling rituals that defined the Rostov Butcher. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What do you think allowed Chikatilo to evade capture for so long? Like and share to help us uncover more shocking tales of dark history. The escalation of a monster's ritual. How does a man go from a single horrific murder to a relentless killing spree that leaves a trail of bodies across an entire region? By 1983, Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Butcher, was no longer just a murderer. He was a predator, perfecting a gruesome ritual that would define his legacy of terror. If this chilling evolution of a serial killer hooks you, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it to spread the word about one of history's most horrifying figures. Drop a comment. What kind of mind could justify the atrocities Chikatilo committed by the early 1980s? Chikatilo was at the height of his killing spree, a period that saw his crimes grow in frequency and brutality. Between 1982 and 1984, he murdered at least 20 people, targeting women, children, and vulnerable drifters in the Rostov region. His method was chillingly consistent. He'd lurk at train stations, bus stops, or rural paths, preying on those society-overlooked runaways, prostitutes, or children from broken homes. His unassuming appearance, tall, thin, with glasses and a nervous smile, made him seem harmless, even pitiful. But once he lured his victims to secluded forests or abandoned buildings, the mask fell, revealing the Rostov Butcher in all his horror. What set Chikatilo apart wasn't just the body count, but the ritualistic nature of his crimes. Each murder was a grotesque performance, driven by a need to dominate and destroy. He didn't just kill. He mutilated, often stabbing his victims dozens of times and committing acts too horrific to describe in full. Forensic reports later revealed that many victims were still alive during these mutilations, enduring unimaginable suffering. Chikatilo himself admitted that the act of killing gave him a twisted sense of release, a momentary escape from the shame and impotence that plagued his life. To him, each victim was a canvas for his rage, a way to reclaim the power he felt denied by a world that had mocked him since childhood. The Rostov region, a sprawling industrial hub in southern Russia, provided the perfect hunting ground. The Soviet Union's economic stagnation had left many desperate with poverty, driving people to risky behaviors like hitchhiking or accepting rides from strangers. Chikatilo exploited this desperation, offering money, alcohol, or a warm place to stay. His victims, often young and trusting, had no reason to suspect the bespectacled man who seemed more like a lost bureaucrat than a monster. One victim, a 13-year-old boy named Dmitry Patashnikov, was lured with the promise of a shortcut through the woods in 1982. His body found weeks later bore the hallmarks of Chikatilo's savagery, over 50 stab wounds and signs of post-mortem mutilation. What's truly shocking is how Chikatilo's rituals grew more elaborate. He began keeping souvenirs, clothing, jewelry, or even body parts as trophies, a practice common among serial killers, but chilling in its methodical nature. In some cases, he returned to crime scenes, drawn by a morbid compulsion to relive his acts. This wasn't just murder. It was a compulsion that consumed him, blurring the line between man and monster. Modern criminologists suggest Chikatilo's behavior aligns with a rare form of sadistic paraphilia, where violence became his only means of satisfaction. Unlike killers driven by greed or revenge, Chikatilo's motive was purely psychological, a need to inflict pain to feel alive. The emotional toll on the victims' families was devastating. Parents like Dmitri's mother scoured the streets hoping for answers, only to be met with bureaucratic indifference. The Soviet police, still clinging to the myth that serial killing was a Western problem, often misclassified these deaths as accidents or isolated crimes. In 1983, when a string of bodies was found near Rostov's railway lines, investigators failed to connect them, attributing them to unrelated assaults or suicides. This denial wasn't just incompetence, it was a systemic flaw rooted in the USSR's obsession with projecting an image of order. Chikatilo, the gray man in the crowd, thrived in this chaos, his crimes hidden by a society too proud to admit its vulnerabilities. Yet cracks were beginning to show. By 1984, the sheer number of disappearances, particularly of children, sparked panic in Rostov. Whispers of a maniac spread, and parents began warning their children to avoid strangers. Chikatilo, however, was undeterred. His confidence grew with each kill, but so did his recklessness. In September 1984, he was arrested again after a police officer noticed him acting suspiciously at a train station approaching young women. A search revealed a knife and rope in his briefcase, but once again, the Soviet system failed. His blood type didn't match the evidence, and he was released after a brief detention. This second escape only emboldened him, pushing his spree to new heights. Chikatilo's ability to blend in was his greatest weapon. At home, he remained the dutiful husband, helping his wife, Feodosia, with chores and attending his daughter's school events. Colleagues described him as quiet, but reliable a man who kept to himself. This double-life family man, by day monster by night, makes his story so unnerving. How could someone so ordinary harbor such darkness? And how did a society so obsessed with control fail to see it? As Chikatilo's rituals grew bloodier, the question loomed. How long could he outrun the mounting evidence? In the next part, we'll explore the investigation that finally began to close in on the Rostov Butcher and the chilling mistakes that let him slip through again. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about Chikatilo's ability to live a double life? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light. The hunt begins, yet the butcher slips away. How does a killer walk free when the blood of dozens stains his hands and a nation's police force is finally on his trail? By 1984, Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Butcher, had left a trail of at least 30 bodies across southern Russia, yet he remained a ghost in the Soviet system. If this maddening game of cat and mouse hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the chilling tale of one of history's deadliest predators. Drop a comment. Could a killer like Chikatilo evade justice in today's world? By the mid-1980s, the Rostov region was gripped by fear. Disappearances of women and children had become too frequent to ignore, and whispers of a maniac haunted train stations and rural towns. The Soviet police, long in denial about serial killers, could no longer dismiss the pattern. In 1984, authorities launched Operation Lesopolosa Forest Strip, a massive investigation aimed at catching the elusive killer. Yet Chikatilo, awkward, unassuming, and eerily ordinary, continued to slip through their fingers, exposing the cracks in a system unprepared for a monster of his caliber. The investigation was a monumental undertaking, one of the largest in Soviet history. Over 200 officers were assigned to comb forests, stake out train stations, and interview thousands of witnesses. The police had a profile a man likely middle-aged operating near public transport hubs. Chikatilo fit this perfectly, yet his unremarkable appearance made him invisible. He wasn't the charismatic predator of American crime dramas. He was a gray bureaucrat blending into the crowds of Rostov's industrial sprawl. His briefcase often carrying a knife rope, and Vaseline was mistaken for the tools of a harmless clerk. This ability to fade into the background was his greatest weapon. In September 1984, a pivotal moment nearly ended his spree. An observant officer, Inspector Alexander Zanosovsky, spotted Chikatilo at Rostov's main train station, approaching young women with a nervous, predatory demeanor. Suspicious, Zanosovsky detained him. A search revealed the chilling contents of his bag: a long-bladed knife, a length of rope, and a jar of lubricant tools of a killer. Chikatilo was questioned, but once again, the Soviet system's flaws saved him. A blood test showed his type as A, while semen from crime scenes pointed to type AB. Unbeknownst to investigators, Chikatilo's rare non-sequitur status caused this mismatch, a scientific anomaly that baffled forensic experts at the time. With no concrete evidence tying him to the murders, he was released after a brief detention. He walked out of the station, free to kill again. This near miss only emboldened Chikatilo. Between 1985 and 1987, his murders surged, with at least 15 more victims falling to his blade. His targets remained the same: vulnerable women and children, often lured with promises of money or safety. One case, that of 17-year-old Irina Luchinskaya in 1985, was particularly haunting. Irina, a runaway struggling to survive, met Chikatilo at a bus stop. He offered her a meal and a place to stay. Her body, found weeks later in a forest, bore over 40 stab wounds, her eyes gouged out in a signature act of savagery. The brutality shocked even hardened detectives, who began to realize they were dealing with a killer unlike any they'd encountered. The emotional toll on Rostov's residents was palpable. Parents kept children indoors, and train stations became places of dread. Families of victims like Irina's were left with unanswered questions and a bureaucracy that offered little comfort. The Soviet system, obsessed with maintaining an image of control, suppressed news of the killings, leaving the public in a state of anxious ignorance. This secrecy played into Chikatilo's hands, allowing him to operate without the pressure of public scrutiny. Yet the sheer scale of his crimes was forcing a reckoning. By 1986, the police had linked over 30 murders, and the pressure to catch the killer was mounting. Chikatilo's personal life remained a chilling contrast to his crimes. He continued working as a supply clerk, attending Communist Party meetings, and playing the role of a devoted father. His wife Feodosia noticed his late-night absences, but attributed them to work stress. His children, now young adults, saw him as distant, but harmless. This double life wasn't just a facade, it was a psychological necessity. Chikatilo compartmentalized his horrors, returning to normalcy, as if his hands weren't stained with blood. Modern psychologists suggest this ability to dissociate was key to his longevity as a killer, allowing him to function in society while indulging his darkest impulses. The investigation's failures weren't just scientific, they were cultural. Soviet police were trained to handle political dissent, not serial crime. The concept of a psychological profile was foreign, and forensic technology lagged behind the West. Detectives relied on brute force methods like mass interrogations and stakeouts, which yielded little. In one instance, they arrested over 1,000 men in a single sweep, none of whom were Chikatilo. The frustration was palpable, with lead investigator Viktor Burakov describing the case as chasing a shadow. Meanwhile, Chikatilo's body count grew, each murder a taunt to the authorities. As the 1980s wore on, the Rostov Butcher's reign seemed unstoppable. But the net was tightening, even if slowly. How close would the police come to catching him, and what new horrors would Chikatilo unleash before they did? In the next part, we'll dive into the final years of his spree, and the breakthrough that changed everything. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What do you think was the biggest mistake that let Chikatilo slip away? Like and share to help us uncover more shocking tales of dark history, the apex of terror, and a society unraveled. What happens when a killer's bloodlust outpaces a nation's ability to stop him, leaving entire communities paralyzed by fear? 1987, Andrei Chikatilo. The Rostov Butcher was at the peak of his horrific spree, claiming lives with a ferocity that turned Rostov into a region of nightmares. If this relentless descent into darkness hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the chilling tale of one of history's most monstrous figures. Drop a comment. How would you feel living in a town stalked by a predator like Chikatilo from 1987 to 1990? Chikatilo's murders reached their deadliest phase with at least 20 additional victims falling to his blade. His confidence, honed by years of evading capture, made him bolder and more brazen. He no longer confined himself to Rostov's outskirts. He struck in neighboring cities, traveling by train to Shakhty Novocherkassk and even as far as Moscow. The Soviet Union's vast rail network, a symbol of its industrial might, became his hunting ground. Chikatilo's ability to move undetected across regions exposed the chilling reality. No one was safe, and the authorities were still grasping at shadows. The victims during this period were as diverse as they were vulnerable. In 1988, 19-year-old Tatyana Ryzhova, a young woman struggling with addiction, met Chikatilo at a train station in Shakhty. He offered her vodka and a place to rest. Her body, discovered in a nearby forest, was mutilated beyond recognition, with over 60 stab wounds and signs of post-mortem desecration. Another victim, 10-year-old Alexei Vorobev, was lured from a bus stop in 1989 with the promise of candy. His remains, found months later, bore the same savage hallmarks. Each crime was a grotesque escalation, with Chikatilo's rituals growing more elaborate. Some victims were dismembered, their remains scattered to thwart identification. What made this phase so shocking was Chikatilo's sheer audacity. He no longer feared detection, often killing in broad daylight or near busy transit hubs. In one chilling instance, he murdered a 16-year-old girl just yards from a railway platform, where passengers milled about, oblivious to the horror unfolding nearby. His ability to blend into the chaos of Soviet life, crowded stations, economic despair, and a distracted populace made him a phantom. Modern criminologists point to this as a hallmark of organized serial killers, the ability to exploit societal weaknesses. Chikatilo wasn't just a predator, he was a parasite, feeding on a system too fractured to stop him. The emotional impact on Rostov's residents was crushing. By 1988, the region was a pressure cooker of fear. Parents escorted children to school, and women avoided traveling alone. The Soviet media, tightly controlled, rarely reported the killings, but rumors spread like wildfire. Stories of a madman with a knife haunted every corner of Rostov, yet the lack of official information left people defenseless. Families of victims like Tatyana's were left to grieve in silence, their pleas for justice ignored by a bureaucracy more concerned with saving face than saving lives. The Soviet ideal of a crime-free society was crumbling, and Chikatilo was the wrecking ball. Meanwhile, Operation Lesopolosa intensified. Lead investigator Viktor Burakov, now obsessed with catching the killer, expanded the task force to over 300 officers. They employed new tactics, including undercover agents posing as vulnerable travelers at train stations. Forensic teams began using early forms of psychological profiling, a concept borrowed from the West, but still alien to Soviet law enforcement. Yet Chikatilo remained elusive. His non-sequitur status continued to confound forensic tests, and his unremarkable demeanor made him invisible to stakeouts. In 1989, Burakov's team identified a pattern: the killer targeted areas near public transport, often striking in summer or fall. But with thousands of men fitting the vague profile, the investigation was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Chikatilo's personal life during this period was a chilling paradox. He continued working as a supply clerk, traveling for his job, which gave him cover for his murders. At home, he maintained the facade of a quiet family man. His wife Feodosia sensed his growing detachment, but attributed it to work stress. His children, now in their 20s, noticed his late-night outings, but never suspected the truth. This ability to compartmentalize was what made Chikatilo so dangerous. Modern psychology suggests he thrived on this duality, using his normalcy as a shield to protect his monstrous alter ego. To colleagues, he was the guy who kept his desk tidy. To his victims, he was death incarnate. The societal backdrop of the late 1980s amplified Chikatilo's reign. The Soviet Union was unraveling with economic stagnation and political unrest, creating a distracted, chaotic environment. Police resources were stretched thin, and public trust in authorities was eroding. Chikatilo exploited this disorder, knowing that missing persons reports often went ignored. In one heartbreaking case, a 12-year-old girl's disappearance was dismissed as a runaway case, her body later found in a ditch bearing Chikatilo's signature mutilations. The family's anguish was compounded by the system's indifference, a wound as deep as the loss itself. As 1990 dawned, the investigation was at a breaking point. Burakov, exhausted and haunted, pushed for a radical new approach: mass surveillance of transit hubs. Would this finally corner the Rostov Butcher, or would Chikatilo's luck hold? In the next part, we'll uncover the dramatic breakthrough that brought him down, and the chilling truths revealed in his capture. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What do you think drove Chikatilo to such extreme violence? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light. The net tightens and the monster is caught. How does a predator who for over a decade danced through the cracks of a broken system finally meet his reckoning? In 1990, Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Butcher, was on the verge of becoming a dark legend, his body count nearing 52. But a single moment of carelessness would unravel his reign of terror. If this climb-clove into the fall of a serial killer hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the chilling tale of one of history's deadliest monsters. Drop a comment. What would it feel like to finally catch a killer like Chikatilo? By 1990, the Rostov region was a shadow of itself, gripped by a fear so pervasive it seeped into every corner of daily life. Parents clutched their children's hands at train stations, and women avoided traveling alone. The Soviet police, under mounting pressure, had intensified Operation Lesopolosa, now a sprawling effort involving hundreds of officers, undercover agents, and early forensic techniques. Lead investigator Viktor Burakov was a man possessed, haunted by the faces of the victims, children, women, and drifters, whose lives were snuffed out by a phantom. The investigation had consumed 6 years, thousands of man-hours, and countless false leads, but the Rostov Butcher remained at large, taunting authorities with each new body. Chikatilo's spree showed no signs of slowing. In 1990 alone, he killed at least 8 people, his methods growing sloppier, yet no less brutal. One victim, 16-year-old Vadim Gromov, vanished from a train station in Novocherkassk in August 1990. His body, found in a nearby forest, was mutilated with over 50 stab wounds, a grim signature of the Rostov Butcher. Chikatilo's confidence had morphed into recklessness. He no longer bothered to hide bodies as carefully, sometimes leaving them near busy paths. This arrogance would prove his undoing. The breakthrough came on November 6, 1990, at a small train station in Donleskos. Sergeant Igor Rybakov, part of a surveillance team, noticed a lanky, bespectacled man acting strangely approaching young travelers, then retreating nervously. The man was Andrei Chikatilo, though Rybakov didn't know it yet. When questioned, Chikatilo claimed he was a clerk returning from a work trip. His briefcase held a knife, but without concrete evidence, Rybakov let him go, noting his details in a report. Days later, on November 13th, a boy's body was found near the same station bearing the butcher's hallmarks. Burakov, reviewing Rybakov's report, realized they'd crossed paths with the killer. On November 20th, 1990, Chikatilo was arrested at his home in Novocherkassk. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning his travel records matched murder locations and witnesses placed him near crime scenes. This time, the police weren't relying on faulty forensics. Burakov employed a psychological tactic, bringing in psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky to interrogate Chikatilo. Bukhanovsky, who had studied the killer's profile, confronted him with a chillingly accurate portrait, a man driven by shame, impotence, and a need for control through violence. After days of silence, Chikatilo broke. On November 30th, he began confessing, detailing 56 murders, 4 more than police had linked. The confessions were a descent into horror. Chikatilo described each killing with eerie detachment, recounting the lures, the rituals, and the mutilations. He admitted to keeping trophies, clothing, shoes, even body parts as mementos. For victims' families like Vadim Gromov's parents, the confessions were a gut-wrenching confirmation of their worst fears. Chikatilo's words painted a picture of a man who wasn't just killing, but performing each act, a twisted attempt to reclaim power over a life he felt had humiliated him. Bukhanovsky later noted that Chikatilo's psyche was a black hole, a void where human empathy should have been. The arrest sent shockwaves through the Soviet Union. The nation, already reeling from political and economic turmoil, was forced to confront a truth it had long denied. Serial killers weren't just a Western problem. Chikatilo's capture exposed the Soviet system's failures, its outdated forensics, its ideological blind spots, and its disregard for the vulnerable. The public was outraged not just at Chikatilo, but at the authorities who let him roam free for 12 years. In Rostov, relief mixed with horror as the scope of his crimes emerged. Chikatilo's personal life unraveled under scrutiny. His wife Feodosia was devastated, insisting she saw no signs of his double life. His children, now adults, grappled with the reality that their quiet father was a monster. Colleagues described him as boring a man who faded into the background. This ordinariness was what made his capture so jarring. Modern psychology suggests Chikatilo's ability to dissociate allowed him to maintain this facade, a trait seen in other high-functioning killers, like Dennis Rader. But unlike Rader, Chikatilo's crimes were fueled by a primal, almost ritualistic need, making them all the more horrifying. As the Soviet Union teetered on collapse, Chikatilo's arrest marked a turning point. But his story wasn't over. What would justice look like for a man who'd shattered so many lives? In the next part, we'll explore his trial, the public's reaction, and the chilling legacy he left behind. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about how Chikatilo was finally caught? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light. The trial, the reckoning, and a monster's legacy. What does justice look like when a man's crimes are so monstrous? They defy comprehension, leaving a nation scarred and questioning its very soul. In 1992, Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Butcher, faced trial for 52 confirmed murders, a spectacle that exposed the Soviet Union's darkest failures and cemented his name as one of history's most horrifying serial killers. If this final chapter in a saga of terror grips you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the chilling tale of a monster's downfall. Drop a comment. What should justice mean for someone like Chikatilo? The trial began on April 14, 1992, in Rostov-on-Don's House of Justice, a drab Soviet building packed with journalists' victims' families and a public hungry for answers. Chikatilo stood in a steel cage, a precaution for a man whose crimes had sparked national outrage. Gone was the unassuming clerk. In his place was a gaunt, wild-eyed figure, his glasses slipping down his nose as he muttered to himself. The courtroom was a circus of emotions, grief, fury, and disbelief as prosecutors detailed his 12-year spree. Over 200 witnesses, including grieving parents and shaken detectives, painted a picture of a predator who exploited a broken system to prey on the vulnerable. The evidence was overwhelming. Chikatilo's confessions, given in chilling detail to psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, catalogued 56 murders, though he was charged with 52 due to insufficient evidence for 4. He described luring victims' children like 10-year-old Alexei Vorobev, women like 19-year-old Tatiana Rijova, with promises of food money or safety, only to unleash his ritualistic horrors. The court heard of knives, ropes, and mutilations so gruesome that seasoned journalists recoiled. One mother whose daughter's body was found dismembered in a forest collapsed during testimony, her sobs echoing through the room. The emotional weight was unbearable, a stark reminder of the human cost of Chikatilo's depravity. What shocked the courtroom wasn't just the crimes, but Chikatilo's demeanor. At times he ranted incoherently, claiming he was a victim of Soviet oppression, or even pregnant with a child. Other times he sat silently, staring blankly, as if detached from the horrors he'd inflicted. His defense argued insanity, pointing to his troubled childhood famine, bullying, and sexual dysfunction as the roots of his madness. But prosecutors led by Anatoly Konovod countered that Chikatilo was calculating, not crazed. His ability to maintain a job, a family, and a facade of normalcy proved he knew exactly what he was doing. Modern psychologists agree, labeling him an organized killer whose compulsions were driven by sadistic paraphilia, not psychosis. The trial exposed the Soviet system's failures as much as Chikatilo's crimes. The police's reliance on outdated forensics, their dismissal of serial killing as a Western problem, and their neglect of victims' families were laid bare. Lead investigator Viktor Burakov testified about the toll of chasing a ghost, for 6 years, his voice breaking, as he described finding children's bodies in the woods. The public, already disillusioned with a crumbling USSR, was enraged. The trial wasn't just about Chikatilo. It was a reckoning for a nation that had let a monster thrive. On October 15, 1992, Chikatilo was found guilty on 52 counts of murder and sentenced to death. The judge's words were blunt. "You are a beast in human form." Victims' families cheered, some weeping with relief, but others felt hollow. Justice couldn't bring back their loved ones. On February 14, 1994, Chikatilo was executed by a single bullet to the head in Novocherkassk prison. His final words, reportedly a plea for mercy, were ignored. The Rostov Butcher was gone, but his shadow lingered. Chikatilo's legacy is a chilling paradox. He was no mastermind, just a broken man who exploited a broken system. His crimes forced the post-Soviet world to confront the reality of serial killers, spurring reforms in Russian law enforcement. Yet the scars remain. Rostov's forests and train stations are still haunted by his memory, and families carry wounds that never healed. Modern true crime enthusiasts study Chikatilo not just for his horrors, but for what he revealed about human nature's darkest corners. He wasn't born a monster. He was shaped by a mix of trauma, shame, and a society too blind to stop him. This story of Andrei Chikatilo isn't just history. It's a warning. Absolute darkness can hide behind the most ordinary face, and ignoring it only fuels its power. If this tale of terror shocked you, hit that subscribe button, like and share, to spread these haunting stories with the world. Comment below. What do you think Chikatilo's legacy teaches us about human nature? Your engagement helps Weird History Unveiled bring more dark history to light. Don't miss our next dive into the strangest corners of the past. Subscribe now. The Shadow of the Butcher, a legacy of fear and reform. What happens when a monster's crimes ripple beyond the grave, reshaping a nation's psyche and forcing it to confront truths it buried for decades? Andrei Chikatilo's execution in 1994 ended his reign as the Rostov Butcher, but his shadow looms large, haunting Russia's collective memory and sparking changes that echo in modern true crime. If this chilling legacy hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the tale of a killer whose horrors reshaped history. Drop a comment. How do you think Chikatilo's crimes changed the way we understand monsters? Chikatilo's death by a bullet in Novocherkassk prison closed a chapter, but it opened a Pandora's box of questions about human nature, societal failure, and the nature of evil. His 52 confirmed murders likely more left Rostov and the former Soviet Union, grappling with a trauma that transcended the victims' families. The early 1990s were a time of upheaval, with the USSR's collapse in 1991 ushering in economic chaos and political uncertainty. Chikatilo's crimes became a grim symbol of the Soviet system's rot, exposing its denial of serial crime, its outdated forensics, and its indifference to the vulnerable. For a nation taught to believe in order and progress, the Rostov Butcher was a brutal wake-up call. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. In Rostov, the scars were physical and emotional. Train stations, once bustling hubs, became places of dread where parents still glanced over their shoulders years later. Local folklore grew around the Rostov maniac, with stories whispered about a ghostly figure stalking the forests. Victims' families like those of Tatiana Rizhova and Alexei Vorobev faced a lifetime of grief compounded by a system that had ignored their pleas for years. One mother whose son was killed in 1989 described visiting his grave daily, haunted by the question, why didn't anyone stop him sooner? The public's outrage wasn't just at Chikatilo, but at a government that let him thrive. Chikatilo's case forced Russia to rethink its approach to crime. The Soviet denial that serial killers could exist in a perfect society had crippled investigations. Post-1991, Russian law enforcement began adopting Western techniques like psychological profiling and advanced forensics. The non-sequitur status that let Chikatilo slip through in 1984 became a case study in training programs. Viktor Burakov, the lead investigator, became a reluctant hero, advocating for better resources before retiring, broken by the case's toll. His memoirs, later published, revealed a man haunted by the children he couldn't save his sleep, plagued by images of bodies in the woods. Globally, Chikatilo's story captivated true crime enthusiasts, cementing his place among history's most notorious killers. His case inspired books, documentaries, and even a 1995 HBO film, Citizen X, which dramatized the hunt for the Rostov Butcher. Unlike charismatic killers like Ted Bundy, Chikatilo's ordinariness fascinated psychologists. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a product of trauma, famine, bullying, sexual shame, and a society too rigid to notice. Modern criminologists like Dr. Catherine Ramsland point to Chikatilo as a textbook example of a sadistic predator driven by a need to dominate through violence. His rituals, mutilation, trophy-taking, revisiting crime scenes mirror patterns seen in killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, yet his ability to blend in was uniquely chilling. The psychological legacy is perhaps the most unsettling. Chikatilo's confessions revealed a man who saw his victims as objects, not people, a mindset rooted in his lifelong feelings of powerlessness. His childhood in the Holodomor famine, where survival meant moral compromise, shaped a psyche that equated violence with control. Yet he wasn't a loner. He had a wife, children, and a job. This duality challenges our assumptions about evil. As psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, who broke Chikatilo's silence, noted, he was a man who could have been saved, but no one saw the signs. This raises a haunting question. How many potential Chikatilos walk among us hidden by normalcy? In Russia, the case sparked a cultural reckoning. True crime, once suppressed, became a genre of fascination as the post-Soviet media loosened. Chikatilo's story forced society to confront issues like mental health, poverty, and the vulnerability of marginalized groups, runaways, prostitutes, and children who were his primary targets. Schools in Rostov began teaching children about stranger danger, a concept foreign in the Soviet era. Yet the stigma lingered. Families of victims faced whispers of blame as if their loved ones' desperation made them complicit. This societal wound, as much as the murders, is part of Chikatilo's legacy. As the 21st century dawned, Chikatilo's name faded from headlines, but his impact endures. Russia's criminal justice system, though still flawed, is better equipped to handle serial crime. His case is studied in criminology courses worldwide, a cautionary tale about the cost of denial. For Rostov's residents, the forests and stations remain haunted, a reminder that monsters don't always look the part. Chikatilo's story is a mirror reflecting the darkness within society and the systems that fail to protect the vulnerable. What lies beyond this legacy? In the next part, we'll explore the untold stories of the victims and the enduring mysteries Chikatilo left behind. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below, how do you think Chikatilo's crimes changed society's view of evil? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light.